We are at week 44 in our journey through the Word, and what an amazing week we have ahead as we experience the preparations and the dedication of the temple. As we begin our journey this week, we see the last words of David as he charges his son Solomon, and his words to him when David tells him to do all that is written in the law of Moses so that God can fulfill his promise to me. That tells us a lot about David and how David himself fulfilled the characteristics that God said his king should have. You may remember when Moses was encouraging and instructing the children of Israel before they went into the land, he instructed them about the king that they would have when they were finally in the land. And listen to his words, this one particular portion I want us to hear that's in Deuteronomy 17, verses 18 through 20. It says, "Now it shall come about when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself a copy of this law on a scroll in the presence of the Levitical priests. It shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God, by carefully observing all the words of this law and these statutes, that his heart may not be lifted up above his countrymen, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment to the right or the left, so that he and his sons may continue long in his kingdom in the midst of Israel." As we listen to these instructions, we are able to see that David fulfilled those words. We know that David was in the law of Moses on a regular basis. We will see that even more so when we get to the Psalms and we see David's love and compassion for the law of God. And so we get a glimpse into David as a king and how he fulfills the very heart that God had given concerning his king. So then we see David also charge Solomon to not only walk in God's ways and keep God's statutes according to the law of Moses, but then David instructs Solomon to deal with some unfinished business. We see there is delayed retribution for Joab and for Shimei the Benjamite. David realized that Joab's killing of the two commanders of the armies constituted murder. It was during a time of peace, not during a time of war. And David does not let that go unpunished, nor does he let the curse that Shimei, the Benjamite, spoke over David as he was fleeing Solomon. He doesn't leave that go unpunished either. I really believe that it's the things that Solomon had to deal with, and we'll see even a few more in just a moment, that prompted Solomon to write what he wrote when he wrote the Ecclesiastes. And in Ecclesiastes chapter 8, verse 11, Solomon penned these words: "Because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed quickly, therefore the hearts of the sons of men among them are given fully to do evil." Solomon knew what it was to not have a sentence executed against evil deeds. And so Solomon now, by the charge of his father and the instructions of his father, is to now execute the sentence on those deeds. Solomon had experienced the truth of individuals whose deeds were not immediately dealt with, and yet eventually retribution was handed out. As we continue on, we also see that David is not just concerned with those who have evil deeds, but David wants to continue to see blessings on the sons of Barzillai, who was the one who had blessed David. Next, we see the deadly request of Adoniah. We are well aware from last week that Adoniah tried to usurp his father's wishes and appoint himself as king. And just to remind ourselves that Joab and Abiathar supported Adoniah in his quest to become king. This truly comes back to harm both of them. And as you see and read the event of Adoniah's request as he comes to Bathsheba, and he says, would you go and ask your son Solomon if I can have Abishag, who was the wife given to David in his old age to keep him warm. He says, would you go and ask Solomon if I can have her for a wife? And so Bathsheba, she answers his request by going to Solomon and making this request. But you might find or consider that that Solomon's reaction to this seems rather excessive, because as you go on, you'll see that this costs Adoniah his life. And Solomon leaves from that encounter and he's angry, and he immediately says, I want you to go and get Adoniah and put him to death. And again, you might say, isn't that a bit excessive? But I want you to remember when David was fleeing Absalom and he leaves 10 of his concubines behind at the palace. And what does Absalom do? He takes those 10 wives, puts a tent up on so that everyone can see, and then he goes in and he lays with all 10 of David's wives. This was a way of showing that he was victorious over David. Now we see Adoniah saying, well, I want my father's wife to become my wife. I want you to listen to the words that Adoniah speaks when he goes into Bathsheba. He reminds her that he should have been the next one in line when it comes to who is the oldest son. The other sons that were born ahead of him are now gone, and he should have been the next in line to become king. And so he expresses his feeling of injustice. And when Solomon hears these words, Solomon is able to see that there is still rebellion in Adoniah's heart. And the fact that he wants to sleep with and have David's wife as his own would send a message that Solomon knows is a message that is a very dangerous message. So in his wisdom, Solomon deals with this once and for all. That brings us to our next event, which is Solomon's dream encounter with God. Solomon has gone to Gibeon to give sacrifice, because sacrifices were still made in Gibeon, where the tabernacle was. And so when he goes to make these sacrifices in Gibeon, at this time, he has a dream that he knows is not a normal dream. Not every dream that we have is from God. Some dreams are just us dealing with issues in our own life, but not every dream that we have is a dream that comes from God. When you have a dream from God, you know you have just dreamt something that's completely different. And so Solomon knows this is not just a normal dream. Solomon asks God for an understanding heart. If we look at it in Hebrew, the Hebrew literally says that he wants a lev shema. Lev is the word heart. Shema is that word that we see in Shema, O Israel. Hear, O Israel. So what does Solomon ask for? He asks for a hearing heart. A heart that hears is a heart that understands. We see this come to fruition when we see the two women that come before Solomon, both claiming that the live child is theirs. You will see that Solomon has the ability to hear with his heart, not just hear the words, but he hears with his heart and has the wisdom to respond to that issue. And so God tells Solomon, you will have a hearing heart, and I will also give you riches, and I will give you fame, because your heart was to hear. Solomon's words also say, God, give me the ability here with my heart so that I can judge the people. In the days to come, we're going to find that Solomon truly does have a hearing heart and an ability to judge the people and to bring a right judgment to his kingdom. We're also going to find that the days come when Solomon doesn't have the wisdom to bring judgment to his own life. But Solomon comes back to Jerusalem when he is going to respond to God. It's not at Gibeon that he responds to God, but we're told that he comes back to the ark that's in Jerusalem, and there he responds to God and gives words of praise and adoration to God. Then we see the names given to Solomon's governmental cabinet. Just as we were given the names of David's cabinet, now we're given the names of Solomon's cabinet. And I just want you to look at some of the names that are there. We have Zadok's son, Azariah. We also have Zadok himself. We have Azariah, who is the son of Nathan, and Zabud, who is also a son of Nathan, who is the king's friend. As we look at these names, we see that Solomon gathers around him very wisely. He gathers around him men who are men of God, men who are priests, men who are prophets. And these are the ones that he draws close to himself. We also see that both Zadok and Nathan's sons have embraced the God of their father. What a lovely attribute and what a lovely heritage that these sons, Solomon, who is the son of David, and Zabud and Azariah, both Azariahs, who are the sons of prophets and the son of priests. It's a wise man who knows to gather the right people around himself. And so Solomon, even in those that he chooses to be a part of his cabinet, chooses wisely. We find that we're told that the wisdom of Solomon was above anyone and everyone who had ever lived before him and who lived at that time. And it says that his wisdom was even above Ethan the Ezrahite. Who is Ethan the Ezrahite? Well, we will find that Ethan the Ezrahite is someone who was a close person to David and had a kindred heart of David. And we find this as we get to Psalm 89 in our walk through the word when we get there, because it's Ethan the Ezrahite who composes Psalm 89. And in that psalm, we see his close and kindred relationship to David. That brings us to the construction of the temple. And for those who are using your trusty metallic pens, you're going to enjoy using these in the days to come as you see how much gold and silver and bronze are used to construct the temple. We find some explicit details given to us about the construction of the temple. We are told that it is begun in the 487th year after the Exodus. We are told that it was begun in the 4th year of Solomon's reign, and that it was begun in the 2nd month, the month of Ziv. We also see, as we go on, that it was completed 7 years later. It was completed in the 8th month, which is the month of Bul. And as we look at these names that are given for the 2nd month and the 8th month, as you look on a Jewish calendar today, you won't find the month of Ziv or the month of Bul. Why is that? As we look at it, we find that the names that are given on a Jewish calendar today are names, many of those names are the month of Babylonian gods. And what we find is that while they are in Babylon, they begin to adopt that calendar that they are using in Babylon along with the names of these gods. And we will look more at that again as we continue our journey later on. But we find that 7.5 years, the temple was in construction. And we also find that in that construction, a man named Hiram, who is king of Tyre, plays a very important part of the construction of the temple. We see not only is it that he sends the wood down and the cedars down for the building of the temple, we also find that Hiram's father, who is a master workman in bronze, comes to Jerusalem and oversees as well as develops much of the bronze work that's in the temple. You have to question, who is Hiram? And we know, and we'll see later on, that the king of Tyre is spoken of in a derogatory way. But the king of Tyre at this time, Hiram the king of Tyre, it was a friend of David. And as we will find out, that there's a reason why Hiram has a close relationship with David and also Israel, because we find that his mother, who is a widow, was from the tribe of Naphtali, and his father, who is a son of Tyre, marries his mother. And so we see Hiram's mother was full-blooded from the tribe of Naphtali, and she was a full-blooded Israelite. And so there would be this connection with Israel and with David. And so we see at the completion of the temple, Solomon has the ark brought from the tabernacle of David into the temple. We also see that Solomon goes to the tent of meetings, which we know as the tabernacle, and has it deconstructed and brought to the temple to be stored there. Where is the tabernacle stored in the temple? We know that there are a lot of tunnels and that are underneath the temple, and I'm sure that there were storage places for the treasury and for the things that David had, as well as for the tabernacle. I'm sure that they were stored somewhere safely under the temple. And so where are they today? Who knows? Maybe one day they will be able to excavate the area under where the temple would have sat, and they will be able to find more of the things that were stored there. But as of today, we don't know where these things are, or even what happened to them. We know that once Solomon gets everything moved into the temple, and now it comes the time of the dedication. And so Solomon is there offering the sacrifices to dedicate this temple. And there comes that exact moment when God moves into the temple. We know that. Why? Because the Shekinah glory comes to the temple in such a way that the priests are not even able to enter in because of the thickness of the cloud. And Solomon recognizes that God had said he would live in the cloud, and God has come into the temple. Once the cloud has filled the temple and God has moved in, Solomon gives praise and honor to God, and then he turns and he charges the people. I want you to listen to the words in 1 Kings 8, verses 57 through 60. May Yahweh our God be with us as he was with our fathers. May he not leave us or forsake us, that he may incline our hearts to himself, to walk in all his ways and to keep his commandments and his statutes and his ordinances, which he commanded our fathers. And may these words of mine, with which I have made supplication before Yahweh, be near to Yahweh our God day and night, that he may maintain the cause of his servant and the cause of his people as each day requires, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that Yahweh is God. There is no one else. It is the last part of those words that I want us to hear. when he says that he may maintain the cause of his servant and the cause of his people as each day requires, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that Yahweh is God. There is no one else. Why does Solomon speak these words to the people? Because Solomon knows that in keeping the words of Yahweh and in keeping the law of Yahweh and the things that God instructs, then all the earth will see and know that God is God and there is no one else. Yahweh is the only God. I believe those words are still true to us today. That if we will live as God has called us as Christians to live, then the world will see that God is God and Yahweh is God and there is no one else. But we will also find that when we don't live according to his words, we blaspheme our God, and the world does not see this God that we know. Solomon's last words to the people in that day, I believe, are the words that should still ring in our hearts and in our minds today. I pray that we will hear his voice and his pleading with us as we hear those words in 1 Kings chapter 8 and verse 61. Let your heart therefore be wholly devoted to Yahweh our God, to walk in his statutes and to keep his commands as at this day. I pray we hear those words, hear them with our heart, and pray those words that our hearts will be wholly dedicated and devoted to our God, Yahweh, to walk in his ways and to keep his commands. May those things be true in us today. Amen.